This is episode 32 of the Ownstream podcast, featuring Sara Warden.
Welcome to the Ownstream podcast. I'm Teresa Scoba.
And I'm Stephen Shelley.
And we just hung up with Sara Warden and had a really fantastic conversation about their life and adventures moving to Morocco for 8 years and world schooling their kids and re-examining every kind of way of living and value system and having a bit of a blank slate. Sara and her family were living in New York City for a while. They had a 6-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, and she had described the feeling of being done with New York. And we talk about that a little bit on the podcast. Stephen and I had that, as you know, a couple of years ago, and feeling done with one place, and then they sort of, it was a bit of a unexpected reroute to Morocco. They were planning to move to Colorado, and her husband got a job offer, and then they were in Morocco without anything and no furniture, and not knowing a lot about the local culture or language, or and then kind of redefining and figuring out for themselves, as Sara describes it, and as she and her family, I guess, describe it, as coming to her center about who they are, how they want to live their life, and taking it from there. And really kind of, we're right on the cusp right now. You'll be hearing this episode at the end of August, but we're recording it right before we leave for our trip in the van, and we're packing up our condo right as we speak, and about to embark on some repatterning ourselves. So this was a really good time for us to have this conversation. If you're just not feeling really right in your life and would love a fresh start, this is a great conversation, and talking about discovering who you really are and designing your life around that.
And what's cool about Sara is that she's not in business for this topic. We really specifically speak to her in depth about world schooling / homeschooling. But she doesn't have any sort of book or program or website. At the end of the conversation, we ask her for where people should find her online, which is our usual question. And she's like, well, I'm Sara Warden on Facebook, she doesn't have a website, So she's really just kind of out there as a mom, trying things out, exploring things, following her excitement and her intuition and her guidance, and some fabulous stories in here about travels with her kids and what they learned. And for me, the notion of world schooling actually emerged to us when we were in Thailand a few years ago. We were at this little remote island called Koh Mook off the western coast of Thailand, which is not one of the more popular islands. And if you've been to Thailand, you know what we mean. The more popular islands, they're just swarm with people. But there are a bunch of them that aren't that crowded yet. And so we were there. We kind of had this beautiful beach to ourselves. And it just dawned on both of us, like, this is how you educate a child, is travel, showing them places. Forget about textbooks. Like what would be better, as she talks about in this interview, is kind of learning about English history, or just going to the Tower of London, learning about, French history and Marie Antoinette, or going to Versailles. And there's some really cool stories of her kids just kind of naturally being curious and embracing learning as something fun, which, if you've gone through the type of schooling that both of us have gone through, is such a foreign concept. And fun and learning have only come to either of us after all of the rigors of our educational system here. And there's a lot of good about the educational system. I've had some wonderful teachers and some great experiences. But in a macro way, it just was not. It was not fun. It was stressful, and exams and tests and pop quizzes, and it did not instill a love of learning for me. That was something that had to kind of be excavated later in life. So this is something we want to pass on to our child, is a love of learning. And I think world schooling and homeschooling is certainly in our future. The shape of that will be defined. But it's a wonderful, wonderful movement that through the internet, people are able to connect and share ideas and guidance, and even meet each other in person. Sara talks about this really cool Facebook community that led them to spend 2 months in Bali a couple of years ago, and that turned into a fabulous experience.
Yeah, and in addition to world schooling, we also cover, a lot about what their life was like and in the different patterns of their life living in Morocco, and being closer to the land, buying your food from the farmer, cooking all their meals together. Like really spending time together as a family. Whereas, before they left, she described, the handoffs that she would make of the kids to her husband. And she said a couple of times, I think something to the effect of like, we were getting by. I mean, it was working, something like that. I just relate to that being in New York. That was even before we had a child, but just that every moment was planned and your to-do list is always extending and you're going from one thing to the next. And that's, they absolutely repatterned that when they were in Morocco and had a different experience together as a family, from everything from, their conversations and travels to the food they ate, the way they spent their day to day. So it's really beautiful. And of course, the relationship with social media, which is just, they don't have a big relationship with that. It's much more about the human person to person.
So yeah, there's some great stuff in this conversation for anybody who is contemplating education, and however form that kind of compass is set for you. I think this will be very interesting. Travel, raising kids, and just thinking outside of the box. She kind of wraps up with that idea, thinking outside of the box being the key theme throughout all of these different lifestyle changes and experiments that she and many others are embarking upon. So it's a wonderful chat. We hope you enjoy it. We'll be back afterwards to wrap up, but please enjoy this conversation with Sara Warden. All right, well, let's officially begin. We've been chatting for a second here with Sara Warden, who is dodging, looks like a little bit of a construction zone in her neighborhood. But Sara, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I think we'll do a little introduction. Listeners have heard a little bit about you. We'll do a little pre-audio before the interview, but we have a mutual friend, and we put out kind of an APB, I don't know, a month or so ago about we really want to talk to some world schoolers, something that's not only fascinating in a general way, but certainly specifically for us. We have a 1 1/4-year-old. She'll be 1 1/4 officially tomorrow, or no, Wednesday. Yeah. So anyway, like that's a fascinating thing. It's a fascinating idea, but also just for us, it seems extremely relevant. So anyway, and that's how we got connected with you. And much to our not surprise, people who are interested in world schooling also kind of are exploring all kinds of other things, or at least thinking consciously about their life and their values and their lifestyle and kind of how they're doing things. And that seems to be really, really front and center for you. So we were excited to talk to you about all of that. Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, I have so much to share.
Great.
So it's exciting.
Well, why don't you kind of start by sharing a little bit about, just in a general way, about your background. I know you were involved in dance and theater, something I was doing, not dancing, but kind of more acting side. But you could talk a little bit about that, and then a big thing that occurred for you guys about 7-8 years ago, which caused you to move, and sort of this dramatic lifestyle change caused you to have to reinterpret virtually everything that I think we tend to take for granted here in this existing matrix of lifestyle and how we do things. So share a little bit about that, and then we'll kind of use that as a way to get going.
Sounds good. So I was living in New York, dancing on Broadway, TV, and film. My husband had his own personal training business, and we were basically done with New York. We knew we had a 2.5-year-old, a 6-month-old, and it was time to move on out. And so we were looking to move to Boulder, and that was kind of our whole plan.
Oh, wow.
And then we were going to go west, and we're going to start our own business there. And out of nowhere, this job opportunity for him appeared. And within 2 weeks, we were living in Morocco.
Wow.
I didn't know what way was up at that point. We had to we were like, what language do they speak? There was so much stuff that was overwhelming. And actually, he almost didn't mention the job opportunity to me because he thought, we've got 2 young kids. I'm sure that they wouldn't even consider me for this job. And he mentioned it in passing. I said, throw your resume into the ring. Why not? And he did. And it all transpired very quickly. And so it was amazing. We had our apartment on the market for 7 months. And the day that he got the job offer, we got an offer on our apartment.
Oh, wow.
So it was just like this clean break. It was incredible. So we quickly Craigslisted a ton of stuff, packed things up, and it was actually just a 1-year contract. And I said, you know what, even if it's the worst year, it's going to change our lives. So let's go experience it. Let's do it now. There's nothing that would be too horrible for the kids. They're so young. Let's just go see what this is. And so we put most of our stuff into storage and moved. And we moved into an empty apartment where we had nothing at all. And there we are saying to my daughter, all right, let's have a picnic. 3 months in, because we couldn't figure out where to buy furniture, how to buy it, what to do. I mean, everything happened so fast. It was only after the fact did we sit there and go, oh, maybe we should have brought more things. We hadn't processed the whole transition. So then when we moved there, we really had no other support. And so it was about 6 months into being there that I heard a woman speaking English in the grocery store. And I think I probably ran over with puppy dog eyes. And was like, hi, can I be your friend? And that's what kind of brought me into the expat community, because we were working for Moroccans. And so they kind of, once we arrived, they were like, okay, here you are. You're on your own. And so the learning curve was insane. And in that first 6 months to a year, we were exhausted at the end of every day. And I thought, why are we so exhausted? And we realized we're constantly trying to translate. We're trying to figure out different cultural ways of being. Just everything was at a heightened level. And so, we were really tired each day trying to negotiate our way through. But in the meantime, we had gotten a nanny, which at first we didn't want to do, but they said, there are no babysitters here. You have to hire a nanny. And I was like, okay. And I think the first day or 2 days, I realized she would probably breastfeed my child if I wanted her to. So that was the first time where we had to say, wait a second, who are we and what is it that we want? And, that's when I think that was the beginning of the evolution of really defining who we were as a family. I was like, I don't want someone to parent my child. Maybe some help around the house would be nice, but I want to be the parent. So I would say that was the beginning of defining it. And for the next 7 years, because we just kept staying there, it's like, well, it's going well. Let's keep going. I think we really continued to reevaluate our priorities and define what our family picture looked like. And it's interesting. I've been reflecting on this a lot lately, because just 1 month ago, we moved back to the States. My husband's going back to school, and we thought this would be a good experience for the kids. And as my son says, he said, it's like moving to a foreign country. Because for him, Morocco is home. He was 6 months old when we moved there. Yeah. And what I've been reflecting on is that I think I feel when living in your own culture, there's all these cultural expectations that you're expected to maintain somehow. And when we moved to another country, it was like the Moroccans were saying, well, we don't expect anything of you because you're not Moroccan. But there was no one checking in to see if we were maintaining American expectations. And so we were really given this like free reign to, it was already understood that like, oh, they're going to play the foreign card. They're probably not going to be dressed right in a situation. They probably won't bring the proper thing to the meal, and we were given these allowances. And so we were really able in a free, open place to redefine ourselves. And I think that's so beautiful. So now that we've come back here and being here 1 month, I'm going, oh my gosh, all those things that just happen naturally, I really have to consciously maintain here. And so that's an interesting transition we're into right now. But that was the beauty of moving abroad, is we got to truly be who we wanted to be. And I loved it.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, so love that, defining who you are, re-examining who you are in a blank slate. So you said before this opportunity came up that you were done with New York, and it's interesting. It resonated because Stephen and I lived there for many, many, many years, and we had that same moment right before right when we got pregnant, basically, and we were done, and maybe you could talk a little bit more specifically about kind of like what was your life in New York like, and what were you done with, and then we can talk a little bit more about what you started to recreate or redefine once you got to Morocco.
Sure. So we lived in a 750 square foot apartment, and that would be 2 kids and a 70-pound dog. And then my husband and I, and we all slept in the same room. And actually at some point, the kids took over our bedroom, and we were sleeping out on the pull-out bed in the living room every night. Good times. Yeah. But there were a few moments where we were all in the same room, and I'd wake up at night and I'd hear everyone breathing, and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, this is like a circus in here. And my husband he had his own business. He was working early mornings and then usually late at night. And then I was, I went back to school during the time. I also was waitressing 2 or 3 nights a week just to maintain health insurance, because I was with the hotel union at the time. And so we had this incredible co-parenting thing. I would take the subway down to his work. I would drop the kids off to him. I would go to school. Then, I would go to my class and come back, pick up the kids from him. And so we were quite seamless in the whole co-parenting thing. But it was nonstop go. And it was intense. And then we thought, okay, do we move out to the suburbs? But then he's going to spend his entire life commuting, and we don't want that. So it just, we knew that we needed a change. And then we started looking at preschools, and I was like, oh my God, this is so expensive. And so it was just the reality of that. And then people were already talking about, you have to be in the right district for the right school. And
it's so confusing in New York City.
Competitive.
Yeah. And I just thought, how are we ever going to get out of this rat race? We're just like a hamster on a wheel, because I'm going to have to keep waitressing whether I want to or not. And it actually worked out well, because I would have my days free, and I never really missed much time with the kids because I was always working at night. But I didn't see how this transition, how we would evolve from this. Even if we're doing very well, upper middle class doesn't get you much in New York City. So we knew we needed a change, and we wanted to give the kids more. Although I joked that my daughter was like the mayor of the playground. She knew everyone on the playground, so social. She'd get on the subway and say hello to everyone. And that was one thing that was incredible about New York, is that just she also was very good at taking turns on the swing and sharing, because that's what a New York City kid has to do. So I did love those attributes, but I think it's a very special person who can stick through New York with kids. And that wasn't me. After 15 years in the city, I was ready to try something new. So, I think it was that rat race. And I remember when we first moved to Morocco, this sense of calmness that I had that was unbelievable. And we were having meals together, and we were taking our time to cook the meals, and there was no pressure, no rush to get anywhere. I mean, in Moroccan culture, if the time to be somewhere is 7 o'clock, maybe at 8 o'clock, they might start wondering where you are, but not with much concern. I mean, it's quite typical. And we used to joke with other expats, is lunch at 2 o'clock, expat time, or 2 o'clock Moroccan time?
Right. Exactly.
And that's where we started learning how fluid time was. There was just a great calmness that was created when we left. That's for sure. So, yeah.
And so, I guess why don't we? There's a number of things we definitely want to hear you specifically talk about how they changed and what you uncovered. But I guess we'll start with the schooling aspect, the world schooling, if you will. This is an idea, an emerging idea or a theme that many parents are exploring. And why don't you maybe just talk a little bit about your experience with that, what this means from somebody who's done it, and then kind of we can get into some specifics about what that looked like in terms of travel and curriculum, if that's even a word that's valid. So anyway, let's begin to kind of specifically talk about that with maybe how that started for you.
Well, I don't think we were deliberate world schoolers. Like, I want to world school my kids. I don't think I even knew the term.
Right.
I don't know if it even existed. When we first moved there, my daughter was really anxious to meet other kids. She kept saying, "Where are my friends?" And she's 2.5. And so we initially put her in what was termed a Canadian school, but it essentially was a Moroccan school, but it taught English and French. And that's where she was for the first 3 years. And then, 3 years, 4 years. And my son ended up going there as well. And then they added Arabic in as well. So they had 3 languages going, which then I started understanding more about curriculums and about approaches to education, and more than I had ever understood before. And so here they had in English, the Western way was ask questions, be curious, let's research. The French way was turning out to be memorize, be quiet. And that was about it. And then the Moroccan way was the lovely Arabic thing of yelling along with the French of be quiet and memorize. So my daughter was very confused about what she could and couldn't do from class to class. And then we were seeing gaps in their education. You know, in the English, they're busy doing math. In the French, they're busy perfecting how they write their numbers. And the Arabic, she was kind of just not really sure of what was happening in there. But she could write beautifully. She wrote beautiful Arabic writing, and she could say things, but she had no clue what she was saying. And so we started seeing this discrepancy, and I'm like, this isn't right. And we kept patiently waiting. Maybe it'll all come together, you know, it'll smooth out. And then she hit second grade, beginning of second grade year. And I thought, we can't wait. We cannot wait any longer. This isn't right. So on a Friday, we pulled them out of school, and on a Monday, I started homeschooling.
Wow.
And that next month, I probably was online like every night till 3 a.m, researching and reading, and what am I going to do, and what is my approach? And so here we are, once again, further defining who we are and what it is that we do want for the kids. Because I felt like just sending them to school, there's this like blind confidence, like, oh, you're going to take care of my kids and you're going to teach them. And I have no idea how you'll teach them, but you will. And by taking that responsibility for myself, I was having to really be specific about what it is that I wanted for my kids. And that was quite empowering. So that first year was kind of a little all over the place. It probably looked more like school at home because that's what I was feeling safe with. But in that, we found an incredible history program for kids, Story of the World. It's from The Well-Trained Mind. And The Well-Trained Mind is a book that really resonated with me. I'm not an unschooler. For me, I do see the value of pointing my kids in a direction, giving them guidance, and then if they're interested, then they take off with it. But I'm not at a place to just see what happens in the world and bring it into a school type or a learning type thing. So Well-Trained Mind really kind of fostered our love for, or I should say Story of the World, fostered our love for history. And the kids just ate it up. And then I'm starting to realize, I'm like, we're not that far, because we're sitting in North Africa. We're not that far from where all this history took place, you know, and they have all these budget airlines in Europe. So you can take a flight for €9, €17. It's nothing.
Wow.
So we started traveling to these different places. We went, we were studying the Tudors. And so we went to London and Tower of London. And it was hilarious because we were standing around where several of the people were beheaded. And there was some tourist saying, well, who was beheaded here? And what was the order of the wives? And my daughter, let's see, how old was she at the time? She was probably 6 or 7, I guess. She spoke up and she said, oh, well, it was Anne Boleyn and this and this and this and this. And she was telling them the full history.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is history coming alive for them. And they just loved it, and I loved it. And so we started doing this more and more. We went to Paris, we went to Greece, we went to Italy, and with each place, aside from seeing the tourist site, the historical sites, I would try and find playgrounds. And that was my big thing, is let me get the kids integrated with the people there, because otherwise we're just kind of moving around like a herd of sheep with a whole bunch of other tourists. And the beautiful things that would occur in these playgrounds. And one time we were in Jardin Luxembourg in Paris, and my son saw these older men playing, what is it, bocce ball? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And he went over and he was like, in French, he said to them, "Can you teach me?" And so he ended up playing bocce ball with these old men. It was fantastic. And that, they would just run around and they'd play and make all kinds of friends. And you would see how much language didn't matter. So they would try out French. And, if we're in France, that worked. But in other countries, that did not. And, and if they didn't have a common language, they would just kind of pantomime and do like a sign language type thing. And it didn't limit them. And I was speaking with a friend of mine who's Danish, and she had some Danes come to visit her in Morocco. And she said the kids kept going to her housekeeper and asking for the same thing over and over in Danish. And it wasn't working. But they never switched. They never adapted in their mind of like, well, how else can I communicate with her? And she goes, my friend said, I think that's the great difference between our kids who are living throughout the world and kids who just live in one place, is that they learn to adapt and they learn to figure out how to communicate with other cultures. And I think she was so right about that, because language was never a barrier for my kids. They would just see some kids over there and say, "Oh, they're my new friends." And they'd run over and figure out a way to communicate with them. And so, we definitely felt the benefit of world schooling. And so with this, my daughter ended up having an obsession for Marie Antoinette, and we visited Versailles twice. And on her own doing, she decided to research everything about Marie Antoinette, and she loves cooking. So then she researched the foods she liked. And then she decided to cook us all a meal of Marie Antoinette's favorite foods. And she really took it on her own doing and just ran off with it. And I totally attribute it to making the learning personal and experiencing it and touching it. And, she was so cute walking through the Petit Trianon in Versailles and saying, "I can't believe I'm walking on the same steps as Marie Antoinette." And you could see the goosebumps on her. She was just so thrilled by this. And then when we were in Athens, we sat there reading Greek mythology there at the Parthenon. Just cool stuff, really, really cool stuff. And you see their eyes sparkle and twinkle. And it was during all these times that I realized I don't care if my children are brilliant. What I care is that they love learning, because if they love learning, the rest of their life, they're going to succeed, because whatever they choose to do, they will seek out how to learn about that thing. And so I think that that's what we got from the whole kind of world schooling experience. And then last year, we decided to go, because my husband was traveling a lot for work, we decided to go to Bali for 2 months and live, my kids and I. And I wanted to just get completely immersed in the culture. Yeah. And it was phenomenal. We took cooking classes. We took the boutique art classes. We climbed volcanoes. We sailed with dolphins at sunrise. We watched some sort of Balinese holiday in which they were slaughtering pigs on the street. And it was so funny because my kids, they were like, "Oh, now we've seen pigs slaughtered." And they had seen sheep slaughtered in Morocco for their big celebration, the Eid. So they weren't even frightened by this. They wanted to jump in and help. It's just like nothing scares them, and nothing, because they were never taught to be fearful of it, it was just a part of life. And it was an incredible experience. And while we were in Bali, we met quite a few other homeschoolers, or world schoolers, I should say. Yeah. And that was really inspirational to hear how they do it. And, one family has been out for 3 years. Another one has been out for about a year. And we all got together and we would have play dates. We went to kids yoga together. But then aside from them, my kids also became friends with the neighborhood, the neighbors, the neighbor kids, and they would go out and play with the Balinese kids. And again, once again, there was no common language there, but they had so much fun and there was so much laughter.
Where were you guys in Bali? Were you up in Ubud or on the...
We're primarily in Ubud, and then we went to Ahmed for a short time, and then to Gili Air. Short time.
Yeah. So we went to Bali on our honeymoon. We've been to Ubud. We went to the Gili. Which Gili? Gili Meno?
Gili Meno, yeah.
We went to the middle one.
Yeah, as my kids say, oh, that's the romance one.
There you go. There you go.
They have the 3 islands. One's the party island,
That's
one's
right.
the romantic island, and then one's the kid-friendly island.
Oh, yeah.
Well, as you're talking, though, I want to kind of just... maybe my own programming is coming up. I'm like, well, if learning is this fun, how are you going to pass tests? How are you going to get into, how are you going to advance a grade? My own systematized educational experiences is arising because I've learned to love learning after my educational experience, primarily through the arts. Actually, the arts kind of have taught me to how creativity is fun and how experience is far more impactful than memorizing things out of a book, and that's kind of carried me forward. But I know my own educational experience, high school, college, was extremely rigid in and around. I felt like I was being prepared for a test that I needed to pass so that the school could get more money and stay valid and whatever. Everybody could keep their jobs. And like, I literally everything I learned, I think, in high school and college, with some few exceptions, I have no access to at this point. I did well. I was third in my class in high school. I graduated college, which I guess that's kind of a miracle. As hard as I tried, I didn't try very hard. But so there's that model, which I think most people are accustomed to, which is, all right, we're grinding it out here, getting ready for a test, and there are exams at the end of the semester when people are super stressed out and whatever. And so what you're describing to me seems very natural and normal and fun. And what I've experienced and what most people have experienced is extremely stressful and not at all conducive to learning and thriving. With that said, I'm curious, through your experience, is there a test? Is there any of that? Is that part of it at all? Or is all that kind of go by the wayside?
So I love how you said how your learning didn't come until after the education.
Yes.
Or your the loving of it didn't come until after. So my thought is that it can be fun now and it can be interesting. And I heard someone say, they said learning isn't supposed to be fun. It is supposed to be joyful. And that joyfulness, what is the word? I don't know. It comes from the process, right? So it comes from you've worked really, really hard on something and then you get it. So for us, one thing I found when we switched to homeschooling, my daughter was like, oh my gosh, this is happening so much faster. I don't have to wait for the boys to be disciplined or for us to be waiting in line to go into class. And so when we went to go learn, it was a small amount of time. We're usually finished with most of our curriculum learning by lunchtime. And then we go off and do other stuff. So it's not that it doesn't occur. We do math, we do language arts, we do the history, we do science. But it kind of happens. It's not this big drama. It's not an eventful thing. And then with tests, so for example, with the math, we do tests at the end of learning something new. And what I explain to them is I say, I just want to see that you comprehend it. Mm-hmm. Because if not, then we're going to work some more on it. And with there are some times where we fly through a new skill in 2 or 3 days. And there are other times we take 2 weeks on that skill. And I'm not concerned.
Right.
And so tests are not a scary thing to them. Mm-hmm. Now that we've moved back to the States, the state requires that we take a standardized test once a year. I don't have to turn the results into anyone or anything. And so I'm able to make it a lighthearted thing, like, hey, we're just going to go see where you're at. And it's not going to be this big drama of test prepping. And because I remember I had the same thing as a kid, like, here come the, standardized tests and the pressure behind it. Yeah. And I don't see much use to that. Yeah. I do believe they need to know how to take tests. And so they will experience it from this year on. But one thing that was mentioned in Well-Trained Mind and then many other kind of homeschool education books and blogs and whatnot is that there's not really a great importance for tests until, say, 4th or 5th grade, like standardized tests, bubble tests or whatnot. That is a skill in itself. It's worth learning, but it shouldn't be your everything. So up until this point, we haven't really had tests. They do spelling, but again, that weekly spelling test, let's just see if you were able to grasp those words that we were working on this week. And so it's not a big drama. But we do, when we were in Bali, we sat next to our pool and we did our language arts and we did our math. And then if I was working with my son, my daughter would go play in the pool. And I'm working with my daughter, my son would go play in the pool. It was not a big deal. And because I'm working with both of them and they're 2 years apart, I need to do a lot more one-on-one with them. I try and do history together, science together. There are certain subjects we can do together, but math and language arts are separate. And so they get tons of free play time, which I'm a huge believer of. And my son has a wild imagination. You give him a stick and he's off in some faraway land. So they love that extra play time. But yeah, learning just happens, and it doesn't have to have a big deal behind it. But like I said, we're not total unschoolers, so I do follow a curriculum. We loosely follow the classical method, which is an idea of using primary sources for your education, as opposed to a textbook, which has things spliced and cut and edited together. Seeing the original sources, the primary sources, it brings so much more. So, for example, in language arts, if they're learning a new grammar skill, they'll read great writing. Say they'll read Peter Rabbit or part of, J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. And they're by reading great writing or hearing it, and then they have to repeat back to me. Then now we've worked on comprehension, and now maybe they're going to do some copy work off of that writing. So now they're learning grammar, where the commas are put in, where everything, how a sentence is phrased together, how words are phrased together into a sentence. And then we'll do dictation. So I'll read a sentence from that piece of literature that we read, and then they'll dictate it back to me. And so all these skills are being acquired while hearing fantastic writing. And that's just inspirational. And then another part of this is that with our history component, whatever time frame we're learning about. So for example, during the medieval times, my daughter at the time was reading all the books related to that time. So she was reading Shakespeare for kids. She was reading Beowulf for kids. And the idea of this is by reading the kid versions, the next time she sees it in junior high and high school, hopefully she won't be as intimidated by it because she's already familiar with it. They're crazy for Shakespeare. How many kids are crazy for Shakespeare? And so by tying it together, they also have an idea of what was happening historically, and they can put a picture to it. We were recently in Italy and we went to Siena, which is a fabulous little medieval village, and they're walking through imagining, this could totally be like where Romeo and Juliet were. Maybe that could be like her balcony. And, they were having fun making it come alive for them. So yeah, the nitty gritty education that I think you do need as a base, we definitely do provide. Yeah. I just don't make a big deal about it.
Yeah.
And now that you guys have come back to the States, and it was just very recently, right? I'm curious. You're continuing homeschooling? What kind of how's that been? I guess how's that transition been? And have you encountered anything just coming up against kind of the way schooling is done here in the States? Any challenges, or how are you doing it here?
Well, I mean, so far it's interesting because in Morocco, if I said I was homeschooling, it would go into a 5-minute explanation with, people looking at me cross-eyed. They didn't understand homeschooling. It made no sense to them. And here it's actually quite easy. Oh, you're homeschooling. Okay, cool. People aren't even thinking twice about it. So that's kind of fun. And then there's tons to do for homeschoolers. So I just signed the kids up from a farm school that they're going to do. They're going to go to a farm once a week in the fall and then also in the spring. And they're going to learn how to harvest and learn about husbandry and all kinds of stuff. And then they're also doing a project-based class about chickens and the government, about how to have backyard chickens and what you need to do to the right channels to work in your government to make it legal to have the chickens. So,
wow.
Yeah, really interesting classes. So I'm super excited about homeschooling here. There's communities, there's co-ops, there's a lot here, whereas I was doing it totally on my own, which at times was challenging. And that was another reason we did a lot of the traveling, because there was one museum in our city. There weren't plays and theaters, musicals or dance or anything to really go to. There wasn't a lot offered. And so I was constantly looking to find ways to stimulate them. And now they're kind of more right here at my fingertips. So I'm actually really excited to homeschool here. And then also I'm trying to take the approach that I don't want to stop the travel. Just because we're now here in the States, it doesn't mean that we're not going to go explore things. So now we're looking at the going and visiting like the Laura Ingalls home and doing all the Laura Ingalls stuff. And my son's really fascinated with the Civil War. So I thought maybe we'll go and check out some Civil War sites. And there's so much here in the States that I feel like many people don't take advantage of, that I'm excited to take advantage of those things now.
Yeah, it's so great. And I think one of the, assumptions or myths sometimes about homeschooling is that you're going to be totally isolated and your kids don't have any social outlet and they're going to be, just not have any social experience, right? I love just everything you've talked about kids everywhere they've met and people they've met. And now that there's this homeschooling community, and I know that exists here where we live in Encinitas too. There's quite a lot of support and, social networking and things for homeschooling. So I know that we also want to get into a lot of the other things that you highlighted at the beginning of your interview. So about how your life changed when you went to Morocco. Maybe, I'm thinking about the way you talked about the rat race, and maybe we could talk, in addition to, the world schooling experience, you had the homeschooling experience, a little bit about your daily life and like what that looked like. So, for example, you mentioned food and cooking meals together. Can you talk a little bit about like what the pace of day-to-day life was like in Morocco and what, for you and your family, and maybe as a comparison to how you painted it in New York earlier?
Yeah. So my husband and I call ourselves recovering type A's. Right. So we were very type A when we moved to Morocco, and we realized quickly we needed to be fluid. We needed to just be able to go with the flow. And that was very challenging. There's a term in Arabic, inshallah, which means God willing. And I love the base for it. Means that like, if God wills it, I will be here. I will be here to meet you for coffee tomorrow. But the way it's kind of turned into in a lot of Morocco is, I'm just not going to commit to you. I'm not going to say yes or no. So when the plumber says, demain, inshallah, tomorrow, God willing, you're like, well, does that mean you're coming or you're not? So, I mean, we really were fighting this for a long time. And at some point we were like, we can't fight it anymore. We just have to go with it. And so at some point I realized I'm always going to have a to-do list, because almost any time you go anywhere, oh, it's not quite finished, the thing I was working on for you. Why don't you come back in 2 days and check on it? And so it was never being able to check anything off our list. It was a continuous thing. There was also the adaptation of, you will spend 10 minutes greeting and saying hello and asking how the family is. And initially we were like, hi, can I get this and this and this? And it was like, oh, that's not going to work. And And so now it's funny, we come back here and my husband and I are finding ourselves wanting to get into conversation with people. And they're like, how may I help you? Just cutting us off.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I carried that bit. And it's something I really enjoyed, was that as much as it drove me crazy, I grew to enjoy that, asking about the family and just taking that time. And with that came the idea that different cultures have different ways of greeting. So I often hear people say, the Parisians, they're not very nice. Well, I found that if you the Parisian culture is that you do not enter a store without saying bonjour. Like, you just always need to greet them. And if you at least try with terrible French to say, I don't speak French,
right,
speak English, they're incredibly nice to you because they appreciate that you've tried. And made an effort. And so that's kind of the way it was in Morocco, is that once we adapted to the idea that there are different cultural expectations, then it didn't feel like so much of a fight. We also had to adapt the fact that to pick up my vegetables, I had to go on Wednesdays between 12 and 3 because that's where when the farmer had his vegetables available to me. If I wanted to get my yogurt, that was Wednesdays after 4 because that's when the local farmer delivered the yogurt. We went to our butcher on certain days. The fishmonger. You couldn't shop in one place, so it was planning out when I could go, and then we also had to plan out everything's closed between 12 and 2:30, so you better get it done early in the morning or in the afternoon. So there were little things like that we had to adjust to, but I ended up loving those days where Wednesday afternoons were my basically market day, where I drive from this place to this place to this place. But, my butcher and she and I became very close, and I adored my farmer, and these personal relationships that grew were so beautiful. And, and then, like I said, we had lots of time where, especially if the kids and I finished schooling, say at noon, and we'd have our lunch, and we often would sit outside on the patio. And was it last year or the year before now? I guess it was last year. We read all the Harry Potters, or I read them to them. And so every lunch I would read to them a little bit of Harry Potter. And the fact that there wasn't a bell that was going to ring that we had to get back to. And so sometimes our lunch would be an hour and a half. It was like, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. And, we always ate breakfast together as a family, and we took the time to prepare. We don't eat any processed foods. So everything was natural, and to take that time was beautiful. And so I'm in a bit of a struggle coming back here, trying to figure out how to continue that with less time and admittedly less help, because I did have a housekeeper, which is just kind of part of life there. So I'm making that adjustment. But we just moved at a slower pace, and many days we never left the house. I never did any shopping there. I didn't buy things. We grew to not really be interested in kind of keeping up with the Joneses. We didn't stay very on top of things technologically. We just kind of lived our own happy life and our own simple life. And, another beautiful thing that you would find with expat kids is you'd often see their clothes, like their pants would be mid-ankle, and, that shirt might be a little tight. And no one thought anything of it. It was like, they're growing out of their clothes, and I'm sure the next time they, travel abroad, they'll probably buy some more clothes. But the kids never worried about it. There were never concerns about what kind of clothes you had. It was about the friendship. They kind of go deep into the friendship much quicker than I think they do sometimes here in the States. And I think that's because they're passing. My daughter in the 7.5 years said goodbye to I think it was 3 or 4 really good friends. And that was hard because people are just coming and going. But they also now know they have friends all over the world, which is a pretty awesome thing too. I think we just lived a really simple, nice life there. And I wasn't concerned with keeping up with anybody or looking like anyone. We were just doing our own thing, and that was okay.
And I know you guys have specific relationships to things like social media and devices, phones, etc., all the gadgets that we're carrying around now. I can remember a couple of years ago, probably even more than that, 3 or 4 years ago, I'd be walking around New York City and literally everybody's head would be at that kind of 45-degree angle down with their phones out, walking and texting. And then one day I looked up and there was somebody riding their bike up Broadway or 6th Avenue or something with headphones in, texting,
That's terrifying.
riding their bike up, and there's like a million cabs, and it was just like, this is too much.
Gosh. Oh, yeah.
So I'd love to hear from your perspective how you've consciously chosen to relate to those things or not.
Well, it was funny. When I first moved there, I had to get a phone. And so I went to the Medina, which is like the local marketplace, and just bought the cheapest phone there was. And it had it was like one of those simple Nokias. And the only special function on it, I had to laugh, and I can't say I ever used it, but you could set your prayer times, your 5 times a day prayer times in it. That was the only special function in it. But I was still kind of old-fashioned texting. And then at some point, because my husband was traveling for work so much, we decided to get smartphones just so that we could talk, that we could Skype or WhatsApp or, just communicate a little bit easier. But everything else was passing us by. At one point, somebody wrote me and said, "Oh, you should be on Instagram." And I was like, "What's that? I don't even know what it is." And then I also found myself writing nice long letters to people. And then I'd get like these 2-word responses. And I was like, that doesn't feel right. Like it just, I was less and less interested in what was going on the screen and more interested in what was happening in my world. And I definitely still used the internet and technology, of course, because it was how we kept in touch with our family and everything. But that's about all we used it for. But then when we would travel, I wouldn't get some kind of plan to have while we were traveling. I thought, there's no reason I don't need to talk to anyone. I don't need to be on the internet. I want to experience where I am. So for our 2 months in Bali, whenever I found free Wi-Fi, if I needed to use it, we would use it. But otherwise, we were out and about. And same for all the other places we visited through Europe. And when we went to Dubai, it wasn't a concern for me. And I'll tell you, when we landed at JFK just a month ago, and there was a restaurant and it had iPads to place your order, we were like, what is this? And we found ourselves all suddenly staring at them. And I went, wait a second. And we turned them all, I put them all down. I put them face down on the table, and I was like, oh, there's my daughter across the table from me. But I was like, I am not playing into this. This is horrendous. And like you said, the idea of everyone just looking down and not being aware, it has been really jarring for us. It's a very strange thing. I just don't think, I mean, in Morocco, if you email, who knows when you get an email back, and they don't think of like, oh, go to my website. That's just not something that they have yet. I mean, social media is slowly becoming a big thing. And as it is, I think throughout the Middle East and the Arab world, North Africa, but not to the same degree as the Western world. And so that's something I really am quite adamant about not wanting to fall into now that we're back, is I still want to keep things simple. I think that the human connection is just so much more alive, and you experience so much more talking to someone in person. And I also want my kids to know how to speak in complete sentences and look people in the eye when they talk to them. And those are things I'm seeing are kind of disappearing with this obsession with technology. It doesn't mean that I guess I'm an old-fashioned parent, maybe you could say, and not that I don't want technology part of their lives. I mean, they're going to start keyboarding now, where they're learning to properly type. My daughter's going to start that this year, but I don't need us to be on them all the time. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if that is.
It resonates. Resonates. You've mentioned a lot of things in painting the picture of your life. I'm curious about, kind of jumping off from that. You mentioned to us before in email before this interview that, having the space in defining your life in Morocco helped you to kind of define what, or, find out maybe and actualize what your thoughts and views and values are on parenting, family life, and marriage. I wonder if you could, as you've come back just a couple weeks ago and you're reflecting on this, maybe you could talk a little more explicitly about, what you've discovered and what you're trying to put into place for your family.
So let's see. I'm trying to think of where I was and where I've come from. I think that I am about teaching about my kids learning from experience, not, as I just mentioned, the whole, talking about technology, not just reading about it, but let's go experience that, and then you'll know. And I think that we are not. One phrase that I constantly said in Morocco when they said, well, why does a family do this or why do they do that, is every family is different. And I've been saying it to my daughter since she was 3 years old. Every family is different. And it's such a simple phrase, but it's so important now that we're here and they see gadgets and they see kids having things that they never saw before. And we just go back to that. And our family is about reading books together and is about going out on bike rides and being physical and eating quality food and preparing food together and eating meals together. And, what else? I'm trying to think. And that it's okay that your friend may be learning this and this in school, and they say, well, why aren't you learning that? Well, because I'm learning different things in school, and that's okay. So I think it just goes back to them knowing that we might be different than others, and that's okay. That's good. That's great. And that there's no apologies needed for not being like everyone else. And I think that when I lived in New York, whether I knew it or not, I probably wanted the new iPhone. I probably wanted to go out to the Hamptons in the summer. I wanted to do what everyone else was doing. And I realized that all those external things, they don't bring happiness. What brings happiness is what happens in the family. So, my husband, someone said, well, how can you travel without him? Because most of my traveling over the last 7.5 years was without him because he was off traveling somewhere else. And I didn't think less of him. I didn't think less of our marriage. This is what we were doing for our family. Because I thought, well, why, if we're homeschooling and I'm sitting here in Morocco, it would be foolish not to go out and see the world with the kids and let them experience it. So that was something I would get a lot. People were shocked that I would be traveling with my kids without my husband. So in that sense, marriage-wise, we've kind of just defined our own terms. That I will go off. If I was to go off on a girls' weekend, I met some girlfriends up in Paris at one point, and that's all okay. We don't have to vacation together, and if it's a good marriage. Yeah. So I think that maybe breaks some of the cultural expectations too, I suppose. I don't know.
And I guess when you're doing that in such a vibrant way, kind of maybe taking a step back from so many things that people assume are to be true and looking at them with more objective eyes, whether it's technology, schooling, travel, marriage, family, food, etc., all these different areas that most of us are involved in. I would guess that along the way you might have met with some resistance, whether that's family, friends, society, what have you. I'm wondering if that's the case and kind of what you fall back on, whether that's a spiritual view or just a moral compass, it's however you define that gives you the strength, the fortitude to continue forward in the way that you feel is defined as valuable for you.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think my husband always terms it as center circumference. When you know your center, you know how far out you can go without losing who you are. So for me, my center is my husband and my family and me as an individual. And if I always check in with those things, I will never go too far off my center. there are absolutely people who, in our own family, who probably don't agree with our approaches. And, I like my kids. I like spending time with them. And some people say, well, don't you want to just get them off to school and have free time? I like them. Yes, I need free time at times, but I like being with them. And that's my center. Whenever I start questioning it, I think that I do return to going back to my husband and we'll have a talk. Well, what is it that we believe in? Well, this, we're okay with this and it's all right. And if I may have fewer friends, but those friends are of great quality. And I think it was a wonderful gift to be able to have friends of different cultures while I was in Morocco. So some of my best friends were Palestinian, Danish. Where else were people from? The Moroccans, French. And they viewed life differently, but they didn't place their judgment on me and I didn't place my judgment on them. And we both learned from each other. And, I was so thankful to my Danish friend who taught me how to be a recovering helicopter parent. I mean, coming from a New York City playground where you have to helicopter or your child's going to be in the street, she was like, no, let them go play. And so she gave me that allowance to go, oh, what do I feel? And for a while, my center was wavering probably because I didn't know exactly who I was. And then as I had these tastes of other approaches to life, I was able to define my center more. And I think that's the beautiful thing that happens in world schooling. When you see that there are different ways to do something to get the same result, then you can try those on and go, well, did I like that way? Maybe I like it better than what I was always raised with. And then you can take what you like. And so then your center becomes stronger. I met one Swedish father and he said, I don't understand you Americans. I was like, oh no, where are we going? He was like, you try to prevent everything from happening with your kids. And then they go out into the world and they are not well equipped. He's like, if I have it my way, every horrible thing that will ever happen will happen with me around so that I can support them and guide them and help them through it. So that when it happens as an adult, they're not so, surprised by it happening. And I loved that. And I took that and I ran with that. And so I'm not there to be right on top of my kids to make sure that they're behaving a certain way or acting a certain way or doing a certain thing, so that I'm letting them be who they are and I'm supporting them. And some people may like it, some people may not. But nobody, as I tell them, there's no way that everyone's going to like you. It's impossible. So just be strong in who you are. And the people who resonate with you are going to come at you like, you're a fly trap. They're going to come right for you. But when you're wishy-washy and you don't know your center, there's no one that really attaches to you in that strong way, because you're trying to please everyone. So yeah, I guess I just come back to our family and who we are, and I don't listen to the extra chatter. I don't listen, it's so easy with technology too. There's so much information out there. And so everyone's telling you how to parent and, well, maybe I should parent like this and this, and it can be too much. And I know when to turn it off and come into my own center. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. I have a quick follow-up.
Oh, sure.
And then I think we have our usual kind of coda, but I'm just curious specifically. I think most people that I know or that we know go on social media every day, multiple times per day, like 10 to 20 times a day. You're going on Facebook, almost like not even consciously, like, oh my God, how'd I end up here again? I'm wondering if that's the case with you, or do you have is there a time window that you will go on there? Is there any?
Is it even every day?
Is it even every day? Yeah.
I would love to say that I'm one of those that I've set those boundaries and I do it from this time to this time and then I'm off all day. I'm not that good with it, but I usually find myself on for messages. If someone sends me a private message, say on Facebook on Messenger, then I'll be on that.
Got it.
And if I get on Facebook from there, from a link, or whatever, right, I'm not on long. I get this funny feeling of like antsiness and I'm like, oh, get me off. And then I just recently, not that long ago, started Instagram, and I forget about it for days on end. And I'm like, oh yeah, maybe I'll go see what people are doing. And, but no, I'm not on it a ton. It's funny. My kids, just probably like everyone else's, will be like, get off the computer. And what I have to explain to them is, they have this assumption that I'm like watching Curious George like them. I'm like, no, I really love writing letters. My childhood friend lives in Italy, and she and I write these long, ridiculous letters to each other, which on a phone can take a long time. So if I'm a victim of being on my phone or computer too much, it's usually writing letters. So,
yeah, I love that. Okay, we'll ask our final questions. So we have 3 questions we ask at the end of every podcast. So the first is, what book or books up to 3 would you recommend that everyone should read?
Ooh, I love The Conscious Parent. I went crazy for that book. Can't remember who wrote it. The Conscious Parent. Everyone should read that. If you're considering homeschooling, I think The Well-Trained Mind is so important. And I don't know what a third one would be. I'm not sure.
That's okay. Yeah. It doesn't have to be 3.
Yeah. Okay.
If you think of another, let us know.
Yeah. Second question is, and for a traveler, this, particularly somebody who's moved in dramatic ways, like it sounds like you have, what thing, item, or keepsake have you held on to the longest, and why?
Oh gosh. My children? No. What I don't know. I guess probably, oh geez. I have letters. When we moved here, just before moving here, and I was going through everything, I found letters I had back from, like, handwritten letters that people sent to me when I had just moved to New York back in 1995. And I have those. And so I know I'll keep those. Yeah.
Yeah, I moved to New York in 94.
Okay.
So we're kind of like class of mid-90s.
Yeah.
It was a pretty dynamic time there, changing from kind of what people think of as classic New York into this, it was like an amusement park now.
Yeah, it is. I liked kind of nitty-gritty New York.
Yeah. The third question is, what have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know?
What have I learned? I don't know that I've learned anything specific as much as I've revisited the idea that home is where your family is. Home is where your heart is. It's not a specific bed that you sleep in, or a specific house. It truly is just being together. And that's, we've had this huge transition of moving here, and many times where one of my kids is saying, I miss Morocco, and we start talking about the gratitude we have for everything we've experienced. And ultimately we are happy that we're together. So, yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. What a fine note to end on. Sara, before we let you go, is there any, I guess, are there any resources you'd like to recommend online, or places where people can connect with you, in particular in and around world schooling and things of that nature?
Well, I am on Instagram. I think it's just Sara Warden 77, SaraWarden 77. And on Facebook, Sara Warden, if you can find me, I'm on there, and that's about it for contacting me. There is a fabulous, if you're into world schooling, fabulous Facebook group that when I joined it, I think it was like 10,000, and now it's up to, I think, 30,000, and it's world schoolers. And that's where my whole inspiration came from for going to Bali last year, as I saw all these other families doing it. And so if you want some inspiration and see how other families pull it off, World Schoolers is a great group to join.
Yeah, we're members of that group too. It's pretty incredible. Yeah.
And then as far as homeschooling, if you want to research the classical method, of homeschooling, I would look at the Well-Trained Mind, welltrainedmind.com. That is a fabulous, fabulous resource. Susan Weisbauer, who wrote the book, The Well-Trained Mind, and then who has written all the curriculum that's sold on there, is just phenomenal. And she's very human and talks about what worked with her kids and what doesn't. She's not some superhero of homeschooling where her kids were total angels and brilliant. That, she went through her struggles. And so I feel like I really resonate with her. And I think that's it. But I think the big thing is start thinking outside the box. Mm-hmm. Once you think outside the box and think outside of cultural expectations, then everything is open and free. And anything is possible. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been such an awesome conversation for us, Sara, specifically as we're kind of venturing out into the world with our little 15-month-old. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. That is it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sara Warden. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including the Facebook group we discussed, the book she mentioned, the other resources covered, and more. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Sara Warden. That's ownstream.co/SaraWarden.
Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that again at ownstream.co and just click sign up.
Finally, please find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Ownstream. Be the first to know about new podcast episodes, new blog content, and cool stuff related to our personal journey. Also, we're on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.